The car eases down a street that, until tonight, had always been just a street. Now brake lights flicker red across a moving sheet of water, and the man behind the wheel can no longer tell where the asphalt ends and the current begins. Onlookers gasp as the vehicle drifts sideways, caught for a moment in a pull too strong to fight. It looks, for a few long seconds, like it isn't going to stop. Then the tires find grip again, and the car pulls free, sliding back onto pavement that's no longer visible beneath the water. On a street ironically named Cool River, on the outskirts of a quiet Idaho neighborhood, the name had briefly become literal. That was one small scene inside a much larger night. Overnight, a powerful line of thunderstorms swept across southwest Idaho, bringing intense rainfall, damaging winds, frequent lightning, and hail heavy enough in places to blanket the ground like snow. By the time the system finished moving through, it had triggered significant flooding across dozens of communities scattered through the Treasure Valley, a region built on farmland, subdivisions, and small cities that rarely see weather this violent and were not built to absorb it all at once. In Meridian, the hail came first. It piled into icy drifts across lawns and sidewalks, thick enough that in the dark it could pass for a winter storm rather than a summer one. Behind the hail came the water, floodwaters spreading steadily through residential streets as storm drains fell behind the volume coming down. The wind, meanwhile, went to work on the trees. Branches gave way. In several spots, whole trees snapped or toppled outright, coming down across yards and roads already slick with rain and ice. For the residents out filming it, the mood swung between real concern and nervous laughter. Cars pushed through standing water that reached higher than anyone expected. Someone watched runoff carve a new path down what used to be a quiet lane and could only laugh. Another voice joked about needing an arc to make it through the neighborhood. It's the kind of humor people reach for when a familiar place stops behaving the way it's supposed to, when driveways become ponds and headlights catch nothing but rain and reflection. Underneath the jokes, though, the water kept rising. And across the valley, it was rising in more places than anyone filming that night could see at once. In Nampa, the failure was structural. Storm drains built for ordinary rain simply couldn't keep pace. Roadway flooding spread fast enough that crews were dispatched before the storm had even finished passing through, running pumps through the night to try to keep intersections open. It wasn't enough. Several intersections disappeared entirely beneath murky, debris-choked water, and crews were left working block by block, clearing clogged channels even as more rain fell on top of the progress they'd already made. Boise told a different kind of story, not one bad night across an entire city, but a patchwork of very different nights depending on which street you happened to live on. Some neighborhoods came through largely untouched. Others reported hail-covered streets, flooded basements, and roads too hazardous to drive. Water pooled near major corridors while lightning strobed overhead, repeatedly cutting visibility for anyone still out on the road. This unevenness would turn out to be the defining pattern of the entire night. The storm didn't strike as one uniform disaster. It struck as dozens of smaller ones, each with its own flooded yard, its own downed limb, its own family standing in a doorway trying to work out exactly how bad things really were. That confusion showed up on camera more than once. In one exchange, a resident insisted the flooding was contained to his own yard. The road out front, he said, was dry. Someone standing just a few feet away disagreed just as firmly, certain the road was flooded the entire way down. Both were probably right. That was the nature of this storm. Flooding could stop at a property line, a curb, a slight rise in the pavement, sparing one house while swallowing the driveway next door. Caldwell absorbed its own share of the damage.
ladies and gentlemen. I feel like it shouldn't even be cold enough to hail. I don't know. This is crazy. Oh, and it's suddenly calm now.
Storm drains overflowed there too, and scattered power interruptions left pockets of the city temporarily dark. Damaged tree limbs littered yards and roadways once the wind passed through, and standing water collected along neighborhood streets faster than it could drain away. Cleanup crews didn't wait for daylight. Work began before sunrise, clearing debris and pumping water from the lowest-lying roads while the last bands of the storm were still clearing the area. To the north, Eagle took its own combination of heavy rain, gusty wind, and temporary flooding that submerged entire sections of roadway. Water rushed through intersections with enough force to be plainly visible on camera, while smaller hailstones peppered vehicles and outdoor property throughout the town's more exposed corners. One resident, filming from what should have been a dry stretch of driveway, gestured at the camera as the water crept closer. A small, almost rueful acknowledgement that things had gotten stranger than expected. Someone else, watching runoff pour past their front steps, joked that it might be time to trade the car for a surfboard. Cuna's experience mirrored Boise's unevenness almost exactly. Some neighborhoods escaped the worst of it entirely, spared by little more than the angle of a street or the direction the wind happened to be blowing. Others weren't so fortunate, taking on both flooding and hail damage within the same few blocks. Strong winds scattered branches across residential routes, and standing water lingered on the roads long after the heaviest rain had passed through. Further out, across the smaller communities ringing the valley, Star, Middleton, Emmett, Homedale, Wilder, Greenleaf, Notice, and Parma, the story repeated itself with local variations. Some towns saw flooded roads without significant hail. Others took both at once, their drainage systems, built for agricultural land and light seasonal rain, simply overwhelmed by a storm moving far more violently than the infrastructure had ever been designed to handle. Across these farming districts, the storm made no distinction between subdivisions and open fields. Both took on water. Both would need days to fully drain. Amid all of it, there were moments that captured just how strange the night had become. In one neighborhood, with the street still running like a shallow river, a kid named Jake pushed a kayak down the middle of what used to be a road, paddling past mailboxes and parked cars while neighbors filmed and laughed from their porches. It was equal parts absurd and telling. A measure of just how much water had accumulated, turned for a few hours into something almost playful before the reality of the cleanup set back in. That reality arrived with the daylight. County officials across multiple jurisdictions began documenting damage assessments, moving neighborhood by neighborhood to catalog what the storm had left behind. Emergency teams, already stretched thin, worked through a backlog of flooding complaints and reports of blocked streets. Resources were redirected toward pumping operations and toward protecting infrastructure. Roads, culverts, low-lying crossings that remained vulnerable even after the storm itself had moved on. The hail, in particular, left a mark that outlasted the flooding. Stones ranging from small pellets to larger, more damaging sizes had battered rooftops, vehicles, and landscaping throughout the region. Beyond the visible dents and stripped foliage, the accumulated hail created a second, less obvious problem. It clogged drains that were already struggling under the volume of rain, intensifying flooding in exactly the areas that needed drainage most. What hadn't melted or washed away yet turned roads and walkways slick, complicating travel for residents well after the storm's loudest moments had passed. And the danger didn't end when the rain did. Saturated ground across the valley meant the risk of further flooding stayed elevated for hours after the skies cleared. Low-lying roads remained vulnerable as runoff continued working its way through drainage channels and culverts, moving slowly downstream toward creeks and waterways, still absorbing the night's excess. In areas near old wildfire burn scars, the concern ran deeper still. Fire-stripped hillsides no longer hold soil the way healthy ground does, and loose, unstabilized earth can accelerate runoff dramatically during intense storms, turning modest rainfall into sudden surges of water and debris. Emergency planners kept close watch on these locations in particular, aware that the greatest danger doesn't always arrive during the storm. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the hours just after. By the time the last lightning faded from the sky, the storm had left behind a landscape that looked, in places, more like the aftermath of a slow-moving river cresting its banks than a single overnight thunderstorm. One family, still filming from their own front step as thunder rolled in the distance and hail clicked against the pavement, described it about as simply as anyone could. Their street, they said, had turned into a little river of its own, water moving steadily past their door, lit by intermittent flashes of lightning, with no clear sign yet of when it might recede. That image, an ordinary residential street reduced to a shallow, moving current, was, in miniature, the story of the entire night. No single community bore the full weight of the storm alone. Instead, the damage spread unevenly across an entire valley, striking one block and sparing the next, filling one basement while leaving the house next door untouched. What connected Meridian and Nampa, Boise and Caldwell, Eagle and Cuna, and the smaller farming towns beyond them wasn't the scale of any one moment, but the sheer reach of the system itself. A storm large enough and sustained enough to turn ordinary streets into rivers across an entire region in a single night, and to leave crews, officials, and residents alike working through the consequences long after the last thunderclap had rolled away. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you want to keep up with events like this one as they unfold, subscribe to Storm Strike, and give this video a like if it kept you watching. It helps this channel keep bringing you coverage like this. We'll see you in the next one.
Don't worry, you can spray it off.
Yeah. Look at the roof, though. All that crap on the roof.
Yeah.